Okay, well, everyone, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we are joined by Yves Engler, Canadian historian, NGO critic, media critic, anti-imperialist thinker and activist, member of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and Disruption Canada, author of several books. He has a new book out about called Stand on Guard for Whom? People's History of the Canadian Military, which unfortunately we won't talk about today. But Yves, we're going to have you back on the program to talk about that, because I really do want to talk about that new book of yours, which is on my list of books I need to get. And just before we get into the topics, Yves is here on the special edition of 1+1. Because 1+1 recently churned. We had our 100th episode not too long ago, and who best to celebrate that and talk about the issues facing Canada and international affairs than Yves. So Yves, thanks for coming for that, and thanks also for coming on such short notice, because this is a re-interview that we're doing.
Congratulations on the 100th plus episode.
Thank you, Yves. I really appreciate that. And just before I ask my first question, I want to thank you, Yves, but not just you. I also want to thank Dimitri Lascaris, Alfred Desayas, Rick Sterling, Margaret Kimberly of Black Agenda Reports, Black Alliance for Peace, Boyan and Maria of The Barricade, Aidan Jonah of the Canada Files, for thank you all for always coming back on 1+1, because without you guys, coming back on more than once, we wouldn't have this show. And I also want to give a special thank you to Solomon Kamishon of Euro World News, Trish of Faint Signals from Vega for all of their love and support, as well as Arnold August and Red Life Podcast, and Jacob of Propaganda. So I want to thank all of them for all their support, and of course my thanks to the guests who've only been on once, and the guests like Yves Engler who come back on frequently. So all right, so let's so Yves, let's get into it. So recently Canada had a general election. And give us and give our audience your overall impression of the last election in Canada. And before you answer, I just want to say that I'm upset that the Liberals have retained power. I was hoping that the electorate would punish Trudeau and his rival oligarchic party more for their abysmal track record on First Nations, Indigenous affairs, their ongoing climate destructive policies, and of course them calling an election during a pandemic. But while I'm upset that the Liberal Party has retained power, although it still is a minority government, they've increased their seats, which really upsets me. However, I am relieved that the Conservative Party under Erin O'Toole didn't make a comeback, and that the People's Party of Canada didn't win these seats, because I know Canada, like much of the world, has seen many people protesting against lockdowns, protesting against vax, protesting against wearing masks and stuff like that. And so I thought, because of all of that discontents, that the Liberal Party would have been ousted, and worst case scenario, we would have had a Conservative Party comeback, or even the People's Party of Canada making making gains in Parliament. So yeah, in general, what's your response to the last general election, your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not that much different than yours. It was probably the better of the realistic options that were likely. Obviously, it's better to have a Liberal minority than a Conservative minority. It's it's very similar to what they had beforehand. So they need to have the support of either the Bloc Québécois or the NDP, which means that that offers possibilities for a sort of leftward push on the Liberals. obviously, there's lots to dislike with the Liberals, and I would prefer the NDP minority, obviously, or even just a Liberal minority with greater dependence on the NDP. But the Bloc Québécois kind of acts to some extent the same way as the NDP in that situation. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of foreign policy, it really wasn't much discussion about foreign policy. One sort of somewhat interesting element was that the Conservatives got defeated, Conservative incumbent MPs got defeated in 3 ridings that were majority Chinese Canadian because they were so over the top aggressive on China, which I think is a good thing. That there was a bit of a pushback from the Chinese community. Other foreign policy issues didn't really get that much attention. But yeah, I mean, to a large extent, it was a waste, obviously, of energy and political effort, because it ended up being more or less the same. And unfortunately, elections don't necessarily lead to the best discussions of political affairs. Weirdly enough, in our world. So I think it's good that people have an opportunity to vote and that kind of stuff. I think that is, I think that we in a more healthy democratic system, there would be more voting more often on, not just on who represents you, but on more different issues. But so as a general rule, I think voting more often is sort of a good thing. But it didn't really change much in terms of the basic political situation in the country.
And we won't talk too much about this because I want your response on some of these bigger questions. But did many of the left still engage in tactical in tactical voting this election?
I would presume so. I think people voted engage in tactical voting every election because the reality is that each riding comes down to, it's by riding, right? So it comes down to who's possible going to win in your riding. I don't like I think it would be better if there was a system based with a greater element of proportional representation, like there is in most European countries. Which case people would be in a more sort of free to vote for exactly who they wanted and not who they thought might win, and voting against somebody. But considering the electoral structure, I don't think it's a big I mean, that's the nature of how the system works. And if you're in a riding where it's between a Liberal and a Conservative, I think it often makes sense to vote for the Liberal, as much as that is not is distasteful in some ways. But I've never personally been in that situation. I've never lived in a riding where that was the political battle. My riding, it's between a Liberal and an NDP. I thought the Liberal was going to win by a lot. I mean, they ended up winning by an okay amount. I thought they were going to win by a bigger amount than they ended up doing. So I personally voted for a Communist Party person because I thought there was no way that my vote would matter anyways, and I know the person in the Communist Party. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that there's lots of factors that go into people's decisions for who they choose to vote for.
And then one brief follow-up question to that is, but isn't tactical voting isn't it very counterproductive? And I won't get into how I would approach the election because that would take too much oxygen. But wouldn't it be better if you are of the left, everyone just voted for the NDP, regardless of whether the NDP is better on domestic and foreign policy compared to the Liberal? But wouldn't it be much better if people used that as a protest vote rather than either abstaining completely from voting, or or what we see now with the right, with this noisy new far right party, the People's Party of Canada.
Yeah, I mean, my problem is that I would see myself as tactically voting in all circumstances. Like, it would be very rare that the NDP candidate in my riding, Nima Machouf, she, her husband or partner, Amir Kadir, somebody who did a lot of very good stuff as a member of the national legislature in Quebec for Quebec Solidaire, reviewed as the the far left of the national legislature in Quebec. He was viewed as the left end of Quebec Solidaire. But Nima Machouf is somebody who on Iran has just really totally disagree with her perspective on Iran. I know some of I know her father. I've done activist stuff with her father and her sister. With Amir Kadir's father and sister. So I know sort of people around the family politically. But I totally disagree with her on Iran, and as actually do many members of her family. I disagree with NDP on a lot of issues. So in all circumstances, it would be a tactical vote, right? It would be, it wouldn't be really like that. I'm like, oh, I'm so excited by this person as like the great, I totally see eye to eye in this person, and I'm only voting for that, other person because they have a chance of winning. To me, like, I don't see myself reflected in any of the political parties. So to some extent, I'm making a concession for whoever I'm going to be voting for. And so then to add the calculation of like, well, who has a chance to actually win? And if it's a riding that's a guarantee that, it's always a conservative riding, or it's always a liberal riding, or if it's always an NDP riding, then I would choose to, if I'm in a riding that's always an NDP riding, like where I grew up in East Vancouver, in that situation, I would probably vote for the a Communist Party or another sort of like left party to sort of suggest that I want a further left kind of position, even if like someone like Libby Davies, who represented the riding I grew up in, who was actually on the better end of the NDP, I still might do that vote for another more left-wing party, just because I think that's sort of healthy to give a sign that there's something further to the left. But so and same thing, if you're always in a conservative riding, then you should if it's a guaranteed conservative riding, then vote for whoever you want to vote for. And that's actually kind of part of what happened with the People's Party of Canada. That's part of why they got greater votes, is that in ridings that were like conservative strongholds, people on the far right just voted PPC. So I don't know. I think that those I think that there's too much oxygen taken up by these debates. I think they're over politicized. I get the idea that if people are going to put the energy into building a political party, and that therefore they don't want to be like building this political party, and then at the crunch moment, i.e. elections, that people, well, oh, I can't vote for you because your chance of winning is not high. I get why people who spend all that time in building a political party would have that sentiment. I personally have never devoted hardly any of my political energy into building a political party, partly because I don't like a lot of these different dynamics that go around this stuff. Mm-hmm. So stick to issues, and there's a downside to that too, right? There's no like, not that one side is the one option is the perfect option, another one is the bad option, and right there, there's a downside to just sticking to issues, because there is moments where you do need to consolidate power, right? And a political party at some level does that. Part of that, it does do that. Anyway, so there's these different elements to the discussion, and I think that personally, I think it takes a little too much. People get a little too strong-willed in their positions on things that I think that they matter, but there's lots of other things that matter a lot more, and they're fairly, I think the differences are not that important. I think the main thing is to downplay how important elections are. They do matter still. I don't want to but yeah.
Okay. I know. I'll just share very quickly my screen for a sec, because there's Hold on. Okay. Can you see this? Can you see this video right here?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know. I know Barry Weisleder, is often against the, the idea of tactical of voting, and he would say, in response to those on the left that do that, this would be his arguments.
Eugene Debs' rule: better to fight for what you want and not get it than fight for what you don't want and get stuck with it. And some of the groups, one of them that you mentioned.
Yeah. So what do you say to that?
Well, I don't want the NDP either, though. So here, so what it's it's a false argument, because I mean, Barry's working within the NDP, the Socialist Caucus with the NDP, trying to make the NDP to the left, and I support a lot of what they do. I think I've joined the NDP to vote to get Nikki Ashton to try to get a more left-wing leader of the NDP, because I thought that is a useful tactical step forward for the left. So I see like a little bit of a straw man. If there was a political party that was very close to my outlook, then maybe I would have a different view. But I still don't. I mean, I think that there's a kind of, it's just, I mean, it's an exaggeration. Like I don't like, what's the argument Barry's making? Barry's making to support the NDP.
Support the NDP. Don't engage in tactical voting, because tactical voting is counterproductive. It only props up the Liberal Party, which is this rival oligarchic party. Yeah, I think. So vote for the NDP. In spite of the disagreements one may have with the NDP, vote for the NDP. Don't do this tactical voting thing where you basically.
You can make the argument to vote for the NDP, but don't make that argument by saying vote for what you vote for what you believe in, or you're better off failing getting what you want than not even trying to get what you want, because the NDP is not what I want. I mean, you go to the list of things the NDP's done and is doing and supporting. That's horrible. I mean, NDP wants they've been criticizing the Liberals from let's go to war on China, like from the right on China. The NDP totally supports the spending 19 billion, 77 billion over the life cycle for new fighter jets. The NDP supports spending 80 billion upfront and possibly 286 billion for new naval vessels. The NDP, I mean, you just go on and on and on of the things. I mean, the NDP government and provincial government, when they've actually been provincial governments, there's tons of stuff they've done that are just terrible. I mean, right now, right? Like the NDP government in BC is more than 1,000 people have been arrested in protecting old growth trees that are the lungs of our earth, and the NDP on Vancouver Island is has the cops come in, and so I mean it's not, there's no connection between the demand of voting for the NDP and the idea of vote for what you believe in, or for me at least. I mean, and I don't think for Barry either. I don't think Barry doesn't believe in a whole bunch of these things that Barry's critical. A lot of the things I'm critical of the NDP as well. So
Alrighty. Well, one of these days we're gonna have to have a panel conversation on what to do with these elections. And I personally am not in favor of tactical voting, but one of these days we're gonna have a discussion about that. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, in this election autopsy, is talk to us about Quebec, because the party, oh my gosh. the party Quebec Bloc. I know I'm butchering that. Yeah.
Parti Québécois provincial elections and Bloc Québécois federal.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that correction. So the Bloc Québécois, they more or less maintain their grip on Quebec. And I know in Quebec there still is a difficulty speaking about systemic racism in Quebec. And now I'm sympathetic to Quebec independence, and I think there is some truth that that English-speaking Canada does have a bias against not just Quebec independence, but the whole issue of of Quebec passing new laws to strengthen French was used as, oh, this is Quebec racism, and I'm not entirely on board with that narrative. But we do need to call out racism in Quebec when it is clearly happening, because the same week after all the results were in, and the minority government came about, François Legault, the premier of Quebec, of the Coalition Avenue to Quebec, he said that there is no systemic racism in Quebec, and therefore we're not going to give people a day off for National Reconciliation Day. In respects to Indigenous affairs. I know Yves-François Blanchet, got very, defensive, and the whole and the whole media of Quebec, Quebec media got very defensive when he was sort of confronted about discriminatory laws against Muslim women, and language and language laws. And it's just also so funny how when François Legault didn't want to give Quebecers a day off for National Reconciliation Day, what happened was there was an inquiry into that Indigenous patient at a hospital who did experience racism, and an inquiry into her death did say that systemic racism was to was to blame for that. So I wanted your reaction on that, and how and how the election played out in Quebec.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a series of different things happening. You're bringing up there. One is there's an Indigenous woman a year ago who was basically killed by the hospital system in Joliette, an hour or so outside of Montreal, at a hospital that had been has a whole track record of mistreating Indigenous people, and she Facebook lived her mistreatment at the hands of the healthcare staff at that hospital, and then the report came out not long ago saying that in fact, if she would have been white, she wouldn't have died, and it confirmed what is not, people have obviously known for a while, that there's a great deal of discrimination against Indigenous people within the health system. There's all kinds of structural obstacles to to equitable health access, and so that happened. That's happening. I mean, there's a longer standing the premier, who is a nationalist, but sort of soft nationalist, a cultural nationalist, has a right wing bent, who Legault, who has been pushing this sort of attack the hijab wearing Muslim women, and has brought in legislation around that. Of course, it's very controversial around religious symbols within public service and whatnot, which is really it's framed as trying to secularize society, but really it's just a go a go at the some of the weakest within society. Primarily Muslim women, but other religious groups of people wear kippas and other religious groups as well. And during the election, there was a question asked at the debate, the main English language debate, that was viewed as the Bloc Québécois leader viewed as much of the Quebec media viewed as sort of hostile to Quebec, and basically framed the legislation as racist. I think making a little bit of an error in that the legislation around religious symbols is, I think it's clearly racist and designed to, like I said, pick on some of the weakest. The legislation around another bill around language rules, I think is substantially more complicated in terms of its usefulness and whether it's racist or whatever. I don't really see it as being racist. I think it's legislation around strengthening French language is mostly a good thing. Obviously, there needs to be the inclusion of indigenous languages. That's a pretty big omission, and Legault is opposing efforts by Quebec Solidaire to include I guess language in the bill around indigenous languages.
Wow.
But so that's a whole big question. But basically, the Bloc Québécois benefited from what in the Quebec media, and particularly the more right-wing media, but pretty much across the board of the French language media, is viewed as sort of what they call Quebec bashing, and this whole idea that Quebec is uniquely singled out and it's uniquely racist. And it's a complicated issue because it's both clearly absolutely true at one level, right? Like what Legault is pursued on targeting religious minorities is something that not even the far right wing like a Jason Kenney in Alberta would not pursue that type of policy. But at the same time, Legault has pursued policies with regards to sort of economic issues that are kind of social democratic-y, that are not much different than policies that an NDP government in British Columbia might pursue. So they really are far outliers when it comes to race issues, right? It's not, you just can't deny it. They are like the Quebec and particularly this government, but more generally the political culture is an outlier when it comes to a recognition that the white majority has been and is oppressive towards non-white people. They're I would say greater denial, though I mean this may be a bit more up for debate, but around the theft of indigenous land,
anti-Black racism and police brutality.
Exactly, on and on. So but at the same time, there is this whole other current of sort of like Quebec gets too many rights. French language, from English Canada of French language is, kind of an anti-French language kind of thing. So the Quebec bashing that they talk about in the Quebec media is not completely untrue. Also, so those are kind of like issues that are hard to navigate. There, it's not exactly clear what's always what's right within that, yeah.
And then briefly, how do Quebecers such as yourself, and those involved in people power movements, how do you overcome calling out racism when it clearly does exist in Quebec without facing this defensive, defensiveness, like what we saw at the debates where Yves Blanchet said, where Yves Blanchet said that we do not. I'm paraphrasing what he's saying, and I do a very bad job at paraphrasing what people say sometimes. But he basically was saying that yes, there's racism in Canada, but we are not going to talk about police brutality and all that because it was used as a way to single out Quebec and engage in Quebec bashing. So how does the anti-racism movement overcome that going forward?
I'm of the. I mean, I think there's lots of groups doing challenging different examples of police brutality or challenging. Even within Quebec Solidaire, there was an organization, anti-racist decolonization collective that working on these issues within Quebec Solidaire, and there's obviously hundreds of organizations that in one way or another in Quebec, people who are born and raised in Quebec, who are completely entrenched within Quebec society that are challenging these issues, and I think that those people are doing good stuff and should be supported. I don't think that I don't think that Quebec's not so vulnerable that it's wrong for English language some columnist in the Toronto Star to criticize racism in Quebec. I don't think it's such a precarious or vulnerable place that we need to be particularly sensitive to Quebec feelings around being Quebec bashing, right? I don't think Quebec bashing is leading to major maybe make some people feel bad, but I mean Quebecers are, if you look at the global economic order, Quebecers are as a general rule towards the top of a pretty unequal global system, right? So I don't think that we have to be too sensitive about those issues. Obviously, there's better ways. I mean, I think that it is better if the person, rather than the person writing it in the Toronto Star, can write it in La Presse in French, right? But I don't I think it's not it's fine if English speaking groups outside of Quebec raise some of these issues, and I think that the question, I wasn't offended in any way by the question that was asked. Like I said, I thought at the debate, federal election debate, I thought it was a mistake to bring the two different pieces of legislation together, right? I think that stick to the targeting minorities on religious symbols, stick to that as an issue. And again, I even as an abstraction, I don't have a problem with. I'm actually sympathetic towards secularization. The problem I have is that it's a power question, right? It's being used to target a vulnerable minority, not that as an abstraction. I mean, I don't really see the need to go at religious symbols, but if you're going to go at religious symbols, I think you go from the top down, right? You take all the street names in Montreal that have Saint, all the biggest streets are Saint Catherine, Saint Denis. You get rid of the big cross at the top of Mount Royal, what the city is named after. You stop allowing churches to make all this noise every Sunday morning by ringing their bells. Right? There's all kinds of things that I would be. I don't think that they're not high on my list of political priorities. I don't think these, whether the street's named St. Catherine's. Yeah, I think it would be better if there was named. I don't know, Toussaint Louverture Street rather than St. Catherine, right? But I don't think this is that important in the grand scheme of what's going on in our world. But it's the power question, and that's where I'm sympathetic to why I'm also sympathetic to the protection of the French language legislation is not because it's a power question. I mean, in some sense, it's obviously totally ridiculous to force stores to have their signs in French, right? At one level, that's totally ridiculous. Except if you bring the reality of the power questions into play, which is that there's 350 million English-speaking people around a province of 8 or so million French-speaking people, and that the language is going to be vulnerable because of that. I think protecting the French language is a good thing. I don't think that I don't want to. People in Quebec would be obviously very offended by this, but I don't think if the French language died, I don't think that would be like the greatest injustice the world's ever seen. If the French language died in Quebec, I think it would be an injustice. Clearly, I think it would be a mistake. It would be a bad thing. But anyway, so I think that like these. You got to place these questions into the power dynamics, and that's why I think Quebecers are not at the bottom of the global economic order, and maybe Quebecers are slightly poorer than people elsewhere in Canada, but they certainly aren't as poor as Indigenous people in Canada. I haven't seen numbers comparing Black people in Toronto to average Quebecer. I don't know where those GDP numbers would be exactly, but anyway, the point is there's some broader context that needs to be brought in, and I think there's ways of obviously many millions of Quebecers who obviously understand these the broad outlines of these dynamics of yes, protect the French language. Simultaneously, let's redress the incredible racism within the health system and the whole broader dispossession of Indigenous people, as well as the racism directed at Black communities, Muslim communities, etc.
Briefly, if you can, before I get to these last two questions, briefly, if it's possible, how did the voting in Alberta and much of the west of Canada go? And did many vote for Western Independence Party, or did the whole Western alienation narrative drama not play up this time around in the general election?
I don't know the exact numbers. I think the Liberals won a seat or two in Alberta, which they didn't hold beforehand, as my understanding. I think there was one NDP seat in Edmonton previously, and I think the Conservatives had all the rest of the seats in Alberta, but the Liberals won one or two in this recent election. I don't think the Western alienation, I mean, it certainly got way less media attention. I don't know the exact numbers, and I think that's partly because of the PPC, the People's Party of Canada, rose significantly. So I think that the whole question of vaccinations and pandemic kind of stuff superseded the
whole Wexit movement, or
whole Wexit movement. But there was just a referendum yesterday, so Monday, in Alberta on with one of the questions being around the transfer payments and the whole thing about Alberta paying more money in and Quebec getting and the Atlantic provinces getting more money from the transfer payments. So basically, Alberta subsidizing Quebec is how it's framed, and then furthermore, it's framed that Quebec is opposed to the pipelines to bring tar sands oil. So on one hand, it's benefiting from the greater the money that's being produced by Alberta from tar sands or oil or whatever, but then it's opposing the expansion of that, but then simultaneously benefiting through transfer payments. That's the sort of right-wing kind of line on this. I don't know what happened exactly in the referendum. I believe the referendum passed, but it kind of means nothing. It's the sort of like, just a sort of like, I guess it may be a populist kind of effort by the Jason Kenney's Conservative Party in Alberta to sort of stick to what you're talking about sort of like Alberta alienation, whatnot.
Well, let's hope let's hope the Wexit movement doesn't come back to life, and let's hope Western alienation, gets flushed down the
They have a
toilet.
bit of a geographic problem.
Hmm?
They have a bit of a geographic problem because I mean, like BC, like if they had BC on board, right, it could kind of make some sense. But like, so you could join the U.S., right, and you could have like a strip of Alberta up, right, the U.S. and then a strip of Alberta up. But if you don't have, and if Saskatchewan want to go in that direction, which is a little bit less of a Wexit kind of place, but a little bit is aligned a bit with Alberta on this stuff. But you have a yeah. So I mean.
We have well, I think in the U.S. we have enough social conservative movements and reactionary movements as it is. I don't think many people in the north of the U.S. go really more right wing reactionary folks. No, guys, like stay part of Canada.
Well, no, but the thing is, yeah, because the thing is that if Alberta went into the U.S., they would vote Democrat. Right, like the Republicans wouldn't want Alberta into the U.S. because they would vote Democrat. It would be like they would be among the more left wing places within the U.S.
Really?
I mean, they have health. I mean, they have health care. Like they have a they have Medicare.
But when it comes to like oil pipelines and championing that, they would probably be going and because Alberta has its history of being both fiscally conservative and socially conservative, right?
But I mean, these things are they're relative. Like even if you take a look at like vaccination rates, like Alberta has lower vaccination rates than the rest of Canada, but has almost I bet you would be in the top, maybe in the top like 5 or 7 compared to U.S. states. Like it's probably at 70% vaccination rate in Alberta, and it's probably only like maybe there's 10 U.S. states that have higher than that or whatever, but it's like the traditional sort of blue states in the U.S. That'd be my guess. I don't know that for sure, but that would be, the minimum wage in Alberta it's lower than elsewhere, but it's actually it's high. No, because the NDP government I think brought it up to 15, so it's actually at $15 an hour. So it would be a total outlier. It would be with like the handful of U.S. states that have moved their minimum wage up. Yeah. So yes, maybe specifically with regards to oil, but probably if you looked at a series of issues, you would find that Alberta's opinions would align with at least a sort of a toss-up U.S. State, Democrat, Republican toss-up state would be my guess.
Interesting. All right, and two last questions because we're running out of time. I know you have other things that you want to get to. So my two last questions are the following. I'm actually gonna switch them in order. Now, a climate activist once said on Democracy and Now that many scientists say we're past the point of no return when it comes to climate policy that can turn the clock around. The gentleman even said many scientists are self-censoring their findings. And given what you and Bianca uncovered in that book that you both did about cars and how much cars have a stranglehold on our economy and how detrimental they are to climate policies. And given the findings of the film Planet of the Humans, that a lot of our green solutions aren't really that green as we make them out to be, and the findings of of a film like Cowspiracy and Seaspiracy, is there any real hope in overturning the impending climate crisis, and if there isn't, do we continue to fight for eco-socialist policies just in the hopes that that extends the Earth's lungs and gives the Earth's and gives the species, more, more chance of living on Earth, even if even if there is going to be an impending climate chaos or what?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing there is no ecologically sustainable way of an individual traveling around in 3,000 pounds of metal, right? Like even if it's a electric car that, here in Quebec, where you have most of the vast majority of the electricity that comes from hydro, so it's very low carbon emissions. There's other very significant ecological downsides to major dams, and there's obviously also tied into theft of indigenous land. But there's no ecologically, even if you have a greenhouse gas emission free fuel source of a private automobile, the amount of resource, the amount of energy, the amount of minerals, the amount of ecological destruction that goes into the production, the recycling and or destruction of the automobile, that goes into the road building. The automobiles also underpin a consumptive economy, right? There is no Walmart without the private automobile. It's like the whole model of mass consumption, big houses with tons of appliances, that's tied to the private automobile, and a transport urban planning system structured around the private automobile. So the private automobile is a total ecological catastrophe. I think it's also, at least within urban areas, destroys urban areas. It has all kinds of health downsides, from particulate matter from the tires that goes into our lungs, and the lungs of those little kids that who walk at a lower level. There's all kinds of health effects directly from the pollutants of the automobile. There's also health effects in that it undercuts exercise, and exercise is one of the most important parts of healthy living. If you want to avoid cancer, the best thing you can do is to exercise. At a macro level, there's innumerable studies that show the importance of exercise in preventing all kinds of different illnesses. So the private automobile is certainly within urban areas is a complete, it destroys livability. It's a disaster on so many different levels, and should be eliminated. The private automobiles as a mode of mass transit should be eliminated, for ecological reasons, for livability reasons, for health reasons, for economic and social justice reasons. Unfortunately, that's not what's going on. As we learn more about the climate crisis and other ecological crises, private automobile ownership and use is expanding. So that is something that needs to be radically, the whole urban transit model needs to be radically reformed. And then getting to the kind of bigger question of, is there hope? No, I mean, I think that we have known for half a century about climate crisis, about climate change, about the far surpassing the Earth's carrying capacity in terms of the resources we use, and as we learn more, we are not really slowing down the machine. We're often, expanding, in many cases, just expanding the machine, the resource consumption, the carbon emissions, etc. And
The war making.
the war making that's tied to a lot of this stuff. So how do you so is there, and then I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the science elements and the feedback loops, and if I think that it's definitely correct that the scientists tend to underplay the state of disaster that we're in. Now, does the conclusion, if you take among the more alarmist or negative conclusions of the science, does that lead you to saying that, well, it's just too late and there's nothing we can do? That's not my sense of things. I mean, even if you were to just mitigate the disaster that allowed for civilization to last 10 years longer or 20 years longer, I think it would be worth doing if we're talking about billions of people having a somewhat relatively stable life for 10 or 20 years longer. That would be obviously worth making some pretty radical changes. What bothers me, what hurts me so much in some of this discussion, like I haven't looked at all the different elements of economic and social life to say, if we just eliminate the agricultural sector. Obviously, I understand that there's huge changes that need to happen for ecological reasons in the agricultural sector, and I think that a lot of those changes can be done and can end up with better food and stuff. I think maybe the costs might go up in some situations. Anyways, I'm not somebody who's really delved into that area of economic life that closely, and or many other areas of economic political life that are very ecologically damaging. I have delved into the question of the private automobile deeply, and what's so troubling about it, so frustrating, is that I'm very confident that it can be a win-win. We can drastically reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions coming from transport, the amount of minerals, other resources put into transportation, and have healthier, more pleasant cityscapes, lives, whatever. That like it exists here and now, right? There are many places in the Netherlands, for instance, that just make North American cities just look like terrible places, and they so they spend less money on transport, they have way better outcomes from the standpoint of health, from the standpoint of livability of urban landscapes, etc. So we can make these incredible gains from an ecological standpoint while simultaneously making our lives better. It's not being done, and it's not being done mostly because of the power of the whole private or whole automobile industrial complex, which includes, of course, the auto companies, the oil companies, the rubber companies, the Walmarts, the road builders, even into the appliance manufacturers. There's just a whole consumptive economy that the private automobile underpins. That's just such a huge part of the profit consumption machine. And that's the main obstacle. But yeah, so we should be, even if we can, even if things look very grim on the ecological front, and they do across the board, we can still lessen the damage, mitigate the damage. Are we past the point of no return? I don't really know. I think it's totally plausible, but we can, doesn't mean there's not still positives that can come from climate action and whatnot.
One very last question, because I know you have to go. So my final question is, and I've asked you this question many times before, Yves, is where did you get your hope? It's a question I've asked you twice in the past. And when you were doing your book tour for Canada and Africa, 300 years of alien exploitation, you had two members in the audience that were pushing back against where you get your optimism. So, yeah, given the bleak, dismal state of affairs with the climate crisis, ongoing settler colonialism in Canada, Canada being an imperial nation, which many people don't want to acknowledge and many people try to suppress, and yeah, and given the fact that that oftentimes the NDP and even your own Green Party act as diet liberals as opposed to these eco-socialist parties that we want them to be. Where do you find your optimism, Yves?
It's better to have optimism than to have despair. That would be just the reason. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of signs that go in the right direction. There's lots of victories, small victories that are being won on a daily, weekly basis, that are advancements for people's lives, and obviously I have benefited from innumerable struggles over decades, centuries, that have made it so there's healthcare, made it so there's a daycare system 3 blocks away where my Joshua can go, and that there's a public education system that's lots of problems, but is free and functional. Basically, all kids get to go to, and then obviously lots of different international struggles that have made it so even people who, I mean, look, like Indigenous people in Canada. I mean, there's terrible oppression going on, but there's also, I mean, if you go backwards and you look at what was going on not that long ago, like residential schools. Okay, so residential schools, it's not that long ago, whatever, I think the last one's into the early 90s, mid 90s, then there's other things that kind of basically similar to residential school, like the 60s scoop, and then you still have elements today where huge overrepresentation of Indigenous people within the foster care system, and a whole process of sort of destroying Indigenous culture and family connections and stuff that continues today. But and it's not an argument for that injustice today, but if you look at the trajectory, you do see some major improvements, and that's not stuff that just fell from the sky. That's stuff that comes out of people raising these issues. I mean, even the concrete examples of what happened in Kamloops, whatever it is, 4 or 5 months ago, with the 215 kids that were found at the so-called residential school, their unmarked graves. That's something that people pushed for, right? That was Indigenous people like forcing the issue, and been forcing the issue over many years, and so the forcing that onto the national media, that was something that again, it didn't just happen. It's something, the media sort of kind of like loses track of, you just sort of think it just happened. No, but it really was people campaigning, people and who quite frankly, who have many greater reasons to walk away than I do, right? I mean, these are people who were being traumatized. I mean, this is a very highly traumatic thing to keep campaigning on, or to keep raising, and so so in my situation where it's I mean, there's some social costs. There's some, if I was to be a right-wing writer, could I get a column in the Globe and Mail or something like that? Maybe, I don't know, right? Like there's you get excluded from being on the CBC or whatever. There would probably be other ways of, if you're willing to go along with the establishment kind of narrative. But yeah, so it's you're talking about pretty like limited kind of costs. And so I guess, in a sense, there's a lot of privilege, a lot of ability to do activism, do writing without too much, I'm not being thrown in jail like in lots of, countries in the world. So yeah, I mean, I think that you take inspiration from people who have and are campaigning and raising these issues in much more difficult circumstances.
All right, Yves. Well, it's time for you to go. It's time for you to go. I wish I could keep you longer, but we'll definitely have you back on the program soon, especially with your new book out. And then just before I close, I just want to say that oftentimes while I tend to be quite pessimistic, oftentimes when I see the work you do, or I see the work that Dimitri Lascaris does, and I see how you guys conduct yourselves, that gives me a lot of optimism, and it actually gives me strength to keep doing also with what I'm doing, even if I'm not seeing any radical changes in the immediacy and so forth. And yeah, you mentioned who would have ever thought that one day in time, in this day and age, that we would see such popular solidarity for Indigenous people and even Indigenous issues being talked about, in debates, and in prime minister debates, and all political parties have to respond to this issue. So I do see where you're coming from with better to be an optimist than to be a pessimist. All right. Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Yves Engler, the brilliant Canadian historian, NGO critic, media critic, anti-imperialist thinker, and activist. People should check out the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. I'll make sure to link to that, and check out Yves' latest book called Stand on Guard for Whom? A People's History of the Canadian Military. Yves, thank you for coming on such short notice to also celebrate 1+1's recent milestone of having 100 episodes. And I hope we have 100 or 1,000 more, and we hope to always have you back on as our returning champion.
Well, thanks for having me, and congratulations again on the 100+, and to 100 or many hundred more.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that.